There's a tracker in your car, the black girl whispered. Then the CEO looked at his assistant in shock. The air conditioning hummed like a sleeping giant in the pristine testing room of Nexus AI Technologies, where 17-year-old Jasmine Brooks sat hunched over a laptop that cost more than her family's monthly rent. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced precision, lines of code scrolling past her tired eyes as she debugged the company's prototype Neural AI assistant for the third time that evening. "Still here, Brooks?" called out Marcus, one of the senior developers, as he grabbed his jacket from the chair beside her. "The showcase is tomorrow. You should get some rest." Jasmine looked up briefly, offering a small smile. "Just want to make sure the connectivity module works perfectly. Mr. Leary is expecting a flawless demo." Marcus shook his head with a grin. "You're going to burn out before you even graduate college. But hey, that's the kind of dedication that gets you hired full-time." He paused at the door. "Don't stay too late. Security locks down at midnight." The door clicked shut, leaving Jasmine alone with the soft glow of monitors and the steady hum of servers. She'd been part of the STEM outreach program for 6 months now, one of 12 kids from underserved communities given a chance to work alongside some of the brightest minds in Silicon Valley. Most of the other interns had already called it a night, but Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that something was off with the AI's wireless protocols. She pulled up the network diagnostics, watching as streams of data flowed across her screen. The neural assistant was supposed to connect seamlessly with various smart devices, phones, tablets, even cars with advanced infotainment systems. Everything looked normal at first glance, but Jasmine had learned to look deeper. Her grandmother always said she had eyes that could see trouble coming from 3 blocks away. That's when she saw it. A Bluetooth signal that shouldn't be there, pinging every 30 seconds like a digital heartbeat. The MAC address was unfamiliar, but when she traced it through the company's device registry, her stomach dropped. It was registered to a 2024 BMW X7, the same model she'd seen CEO Graham Leary step out of that morning. "Weird," she whispered to herself, leaning closer to the screen. The car should be in the parking garage, powered down for the night. Why would it be transmitting data? She tried to dismiss it as a glitch, maybe some kind of automatic update system. But as she watched the signal pattern, something nagged at her. The intervals were too regular, too precise. And there was something else. The signal wasn't just pinging randomly. It was bouncing through a cloaked IP address, one that seemed vaguely familiar. Jasmine's fingers flew across the keyboard as she opened another window, diving into her personal files from last year's cybersecurity challenge. She'd placed third in the national competition, and part of her preparation had involved studying various IP obfuscation techniques. She scrolled through her notes, cross-referencing the address patterns until she found it. Her blood ran cold. The IP address was using the same masking protocol as a known surveillance network, one that had been used by corporate espionage groups to monitor high-value targets. This wasn't a bug or a glitch. This was intentional. Someone was tracking Graham Leary's movements, and they were doing it through a device hidden in his car. Jasmine's hands trembled slightly as she saved the data to an encrypted folder on her personal drive. She'd grown up in East Oakland, where being observant could mean the difference between staying safe and walking into trouble. Every instinct she'd developed over the years was screaming at her now. She pulled up the device's transmission history, her heart racing as she saw the pattern. The tracker had been active for weeks, recording timestamps and location data. Whoever was behind this had been watching Mr. Leary's every move, his trips to the office, his lunch meetings, even his weekend visits to what looked like a country club in Palo Alto. But who would want to track the CEO of an AI company? And more importantly, who would have the technical skills and access to pull it off? Jasmine's mind raced through the possibilities. Corporate espionage was common in Silicon Valley, but this felt different. More personal. The tracker wasn't just monitoring business meetings, it was recording everything. Someone wanted to know every detail of Graham Leary's life. She glanced at the clock. 11:47 p.m. Security would be doing their final rounds soon, and she needed to get back to her dorm. But as she prepared to shut down her workstation, another thought struck her. If someone was tracking Mr. Leary, they might be monitoring other company communications too. She pulled up the network logs, scanning for any other unusual activity. What she found made her stomach lurch. There had been several unauthorized access attempts to the company's secure servers over the past month, all originating from within the building. Someone with legitimate credentials was trying to access files they shouldn't have permission to see. The attempts were subtle, disguised as routine maintenance checks, but Jasmine's trained eye caught the discrepancies. She saved everything to her encrypted drive and quietly packed up her belongings. As she walked through the empty corridors toward the elevator, her mind was already working through the implications. Someone inside Nexus AI was conducting surveillance on their own CEO. This wasn't just corporate espionage, it was betrayal at the highest level. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding, and Jasmine stepped inside, her reflection staring back at her from the polished steel walls. She looked young, uncertain, maybe even scared. But behind her eyes was a determination that had carried her through advanced calculus, coding competitions, and a scholarship application process that had brought her to this moment. Tomorrow was the internship showcase, where she and the other students would present their projects to the executive team. It was supposed to be her chance to impress potential employers, to prove that a kid from Oakland could hold her own in Silicon Valley's biggest leagues. Instead, she was going to have to tell Graham Leary that someone was watching his every move. As the elevator descended toward the lobby, Jasmine made a decision. She would find a way to approach Mr. Leary tomorrow, somehow work up the courage to share what she'd discovered. The evidence was solid: MAC addresses, IP logs, transmission patterns that told a story of systematic surveillance. But first, she had to survive the night without anyone discovering what she knew. The lobby was empty except for a security guard reading a newspaper behind the reception desk. He looked up as she approached, offering a friendly nod. "Working late again, Ms. Brooks?" "Just finishing up some testing," she replied, forcing a smile. "Big day tomorrow." "That's right, the showcase. You kids are impressive. When I was your age, I barely knew how to program a VCR." Jasmine laughed politely, but her mind was elsewhere. As she walked toward the exit, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She glanced over her shoulder, but the lobby was empty except for the guard, who had returned to his newspaper. The automatic doors slid open, and she stepped into the cool night air. The company parking garage was to her left, and she found herself staring at the rows of expensive cars, wondering which one belonged to Mr. Leary. Somewhere in that garage was a BMW X7 with a hidden tracker, broadcasting its location to someone who had no right to know. Tomorrow, she would have to find the courage to whisper those words that would change everything. "There's a tracker in your car." But tonight, she was just a 17-year-old girl with a terrible secret, walking alone through the shadows of Silicon Valley, carrying evidence that could expose a conspiracy at the heart of one of America's most powerful tech companies. The question that haunted her as she made her way back to the intern dormitory was simple but terrifying. If someone was willing to track the CEO's every movement, what would they do to a young intern who had discovered their secret? The elevator doors opened with a soft ding, and Jasmine stepped inside, her reflection staring back at her from the polished steel walls. She looked young, uncertain, maybe even scared. But behind her eyes was a determination that had carried her through advanced calculus, coding competitions, and a scholarship application process that had brought her to this moment. Tomorrow was the internship showcase, where she and the other students would present their projects to the executive team. It was supposed to be her chance to impress potential employers, to prove that a kid from Oakland could hold her own in Silicon Valley's biggest leagues. Instead, she was going to have to tell Graham Leary that someone was watching his every move. As the elevator descended toward the lobby, Jasmine made a decision. She would find a way to approach Mr. Leary tomorrow, somehow work up the courage to share what she'd discovered. The evidence was solid: MAC addresses, IP logs, transmission patterns that told a story of systematic surveillance. But first, she had to survive the night without anyone discovering what she knew. The lobby was empty except for a security guard reading a newspaper behind the reception desk. He looked up as she approached, offering a friendly nod. "Working late again, Ms. Brooks?" "Just finishing up some testing," she replied, forcing a smile. "Big day tomorrow." "That's right, the showcase. You kids are impressive. When I was your age, I barely knew how to program a VCR." Jasmine laughed politely, but her mind was elsewhere. As she walked toward the exit, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She glanced over her shoulder, but the lobby was empty except for the guard, who had returned to his newspaper. The automatic doors slid open, and she stepped into the cool night air. The company parking garage was to her left, and she found herself staring at the rows of expensive cars, wondering which one belonged to Mr. Leary. Somewhere in that garage was a BMW X7 with a hidden tracker, broadcasting its location to someone who had no right to know. Tomorrow, she would have to find the courage to whisper those words that would change everything. "There's a tracker in your car." But tonight, she was just a 17-year-old girl with a terrible secret, walking alone through the shadows of Silicon Valley, carrying evidence that could expose a conspiracy at the heart of one of America's most powerful tech companies. The question that haunted her as she made her way back to the intern dormitory was simple but terrifying. If someone was willing to track the CEO's every movement, what would they do to a young intern who had discovered their secret? The next morning arrived gray and overcast, matching Graham Leary's mood as he sat in his private conference room, staring at the mahogany table that had hosted countless board meetings and strategic decisions. His coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but he barely noticed. All night, he'd wrestled with Jasmine's revelation, turning it over in his mind like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. Curtis Hale had been his right hand for 3 years. The man knew his schedule better than his own wife did, coordinated his meetings, screened his calls, and had access to information that could make or break the company. The idea that Curtis would betray him felt like discovering his own shadow had turned against him. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." Curtis entered with his usual confident stride, tablet in hand and that familiar easy smile that had charmed investors and smoothed over countless corporate crises. He was impeccably dressed as always, his suit pressed to perfection, his dark hair styled with just enough product to look professional but not overdone. "Morning, Graham. You're in early today. The quarterly projections meeting isn't until 10. Curtis settled into his usual chair across the table, already pulling up files on his tablet. "I've got the Johnson Industries contract ready for review, and the marketing team wants to discuss the new campaign strategy." Graham studied his assistant's face, searching for any sign of deception, any crack in the polished exterior. Curtis looked exactly as he always did, competent, loyal, slightly concerned about Graham's unusually quiet mood. "Curtis, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course. What's going on?" Graham leaned forward, his voice carefully controlled. "Do you know anything about a tracking device in my car?" For just a moment, less than a second, Curtis's expression flickered. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but Graham caught it. A tightening around the eyes, a slight pause before the smile returned. "A tracking device? Graham, what are you talking about?" "Someone's been monitoring my movements. The device is connected to a burner phone registered under your name." Curtis's laugh was too quick, too bright. "That's crazy. Why would I track your car? I already know your schedule better than you do." He gestured at his tablet. "Look, I've got your whole week mapped out right here. If I wanted to know where you were going, I'd just check your calendar." The explanation was smooth, reasonable, delivered with Curtis's trademark charm. But Graham had spent enough years in Silicon Valley to recognize when someone was deflecting. "Maybe it was some kind of security measure?" Curtis continued, his tone becoming more serious. "You know how paranoid the security team gets about executive protection. Maybe they installed something without telling us? Or maybe," Graham said slowly, "it was for asset tracking. Some kind of test you forgot to mention?" Curtis nodded eagerly. "That could be it. You know how many pilot programs we run. I probably signed off on something months ago and forgot about it. He pulled out his phone. Let me check with the security department right now. But Graham was already standing up. No need. I've already spoken with them. The lie came easily, but it had the desired effect. Curtis's hand froze over his phone, and for a moment, the mask slipped completely. Graham saw something in his assistant's eyes that he'd never seen before: fear. Look, Curtis said, his voice taking on a slightly defensive edge. If there's some kind of misunderstanding here, I'm sure we can clear it up. Maybe someone used my information without authorization. Identity theft is pretty common these days. Graham walked to the window, looking out at the parking garage where his BMW sat in its reserved spot. I had a private security technician examine the car this morning, Curtis. Before our meeting. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Graham could feel Curtis's eyes on his back, could almost hear the man's mind racing through explanations and excuses. What did they find? Curtis asked finally. Graham turned around, his expression grave. A small device hidden behind the rear interior panel. Professional grade, not something you'd buy at an electronics store. It's been transmitting data for weeks. Curtis's face had gone pale, but he maintained his composure. Graham, I swear to you, I have no idea how that got there. Someone's trying to frame me. The device was linked to the same burner phone in your name. The same phone that's been receiving location data, timestamps, everywhere I've been going. Anyone could have set up a phone in my name. You know that, right? This is clearly corporate espionage, someone trying to drive a wedge between us. Graham had to admit, Curtis was good. Even caught red-handed, he was spinning a narrative that almost made sense. But there was something else, something that made Graham's blood run cold. Curtis, there's something I didn't tell you about the device. What? It wasn't just tracking the car. It was recording audio. The lie hit its mark. Curtis's face went white, and for a moment, he looked like he might be sick. In that instant, Graham saw the truth written across his assistant's features: guilt, panic, and something else. Resignation. Curtis, Graham said quietly. Who are you working for? Curtis was quiet for a long moment, his hands clenched in his lap. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. You don't understand the pressures I'm under. The debts, the expectations. They offered me a way out. Who offered you a way out? But Curtis was already shaking his head, his lawyer's instincts kicking in. I think I need to speak with legal counsel before we continue this conversation. Graham felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just about tracking his movements anymore. Curtis's reaction suggested something much deeper, much more dangerous. Meanwhile, 3 floors below in the intern dormitory, Jasmine Brooks was staring at her laptop screen in horror. A warning message had appeared, disguised as a routine system patch, but her cybersecurity training had taught her to be suspicious of unexpected updates. She'd isolated the file and run it through her personal analysis tools, and what she'd found made her hands shake. It was a keylogger, designed to record every keystroke, every password, every piece of information she typed. Someone inside the company knew she'd discovered the tracker. Someone was watching her now, just as they'd been watching Graham. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Be careful what you share. Some secrets are worth for. Jasmine's blood turned to ice. This wasn't just corporate espionage anymore. This was war. Jasmine's hands trembled as she disconnected her laptop from the company's network, the threatening text message still glowing on her phone screen. The intern dormitory felt suddenly claustrophobic, its beige walls closing in around her like a trap. She'd moved her workstation to the corner of her small room, creating a makeshift fortress with her desk chair and a towel draped over the window to block any potential surveillance. Her personal laptop, a refurbished ThinkPad her grandmother had saved months to buy, sat isolated on her desk, completely disconnected from any network. If someone was monitoring her through the company systems, they wouldn't be able to reach her here. At least, that's what she hoped. The keylogger files sat in quarantine on her screen, its malicious code stripped bare by her security tools. She'd been studying it for 2 hours now, tracing its digital fingerprints like a detective examining evidence at a crime scene. The sophistication was impressive. This wasn't the work of some amateur hacker. Whoever had created this had serious skills and serious resources. "Come on," she whispered to herself, scrolling through lines of code. "Show me who you really are." The breakthrough came when she found the deployment signature buried deep in the file's metadata. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it referenced a hidden directory on Nexus AI's internal servers. A directory that, according to the company's public documentation, shouldn't exist. "AI expansion R4 encrypted," she read aloud, her voice barely audible in the small room. She'd memorized the company's project structure during her first week as an intern. There was no R4 project listed anywhere in the official documentation. No expansion initiative with that codename. Which meant someone had created it off the books. Jasmine pulled up her backup connection, a mobile hotspot she'd bought with her own money for emergencies. She couldn't risk accessing the company's servers directly, but she had other tools at her disposal. Her cybersecurity competition experience had taught her more than just defensive techniques. Working carefully, she began to trace the hidden directory's digital footprint. The trail led through a maze of proxy servers and encrypted tunnels, each layer designed to obscure the true source. But Jasmine was patient, methodical, following each thread until she found what she was looking for. The directory was real, and it was active. Files were being uploaded and downloaded regularly, always during off hours when most employees had gone home. The access logs showed a pattern of activity that matched the timestamps on the tracker in Graham's car. "Someone's been very busy," she murmured, screenshotting the evidence. But the real shock came when she traced the server's registration. The hidden directory wasn't just hosted on Nexus AI's servers. It was routing data to an external location. A shell company registered in the Cayman Islands, operating under the name Titan Ventures LLC. Jasmine's research skills, honed through years of academic competitions and college prep courses, kicked into high gear. She pulled up business registration databases, cross-referenced financial filings, and followed the paper trail until she found the connection that made her blood run cold. Titan Ventures had been founded just 6 months ago, shortly after she'd started her internship. The company had no public website, no listed employees, and no clear business purpose. But buried in the incorporation documents was a name that made everything click into place. The registered agent was a law firm that specialized in corporate acquisitions and intellectual property disputes. The same law firm that had represented several high-profile cases involving stolen trade secrets and corporate espionage. "This isn't just surveillance," Jasmine realized, her voice shaking. "This is industrial espionage on a massive scale." She quickly composed an encrypted message to Graham, attaching the evidence she'd gathered. But as she prepared to send it, her phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. "Stop digging, little girl. Some graves are too deep for children." Jasmine's hands froze over the keyboard. They were watching her more closely than she'd realized. Every move she made, every file she accessed, someone was tracking her progress. But instead of fear, she felt something else rising in her chest: anger. She'd grown up in a neighborhood where bullies thought they could intimidate anyone smaller than them. She'd learned long ago that backing down only made them stronger. She finished composing her message to Graham, adding a final warning. "If this goes higher than Curtis, they'll know we're looking. We need to be smart about our next move." As she hit send, using her encrypted connection to route the message through multiple proxy servers, Jasmine made a decision. She wasn't going to hide in her room like a scared child. If someone wanted to threaten her, they'd pick the wrong target. She began to dig deeper into the shell company's connections, following money trails and corporate filings that painted a picture of a sophisticated operation. The more she learned, the more she realized that Curtis was just a small player in a much larger game. Someone with serious resources and connections was orchestrating this entire operation. Someone who had been planning this for months, maybe years. Someone who had been systematically infiltrating Nexus AI from the inside, stealing intellectual property, and preparing for something big. The question was, who? As if in answer to her thoughts, her phone buzzed with a new message. This time, it wasn't a threat. It was a single photograph, a picture of her walking into the dormitory that evening, taken from somewhere in the parking lot. Below the image was a simple message. "We're closer than you think." Jasmine's blood ran cold as she realized the implications. Whoever was behind this wasn't just watching her digitally. They were physically surveilling her, tracking her movements just as they'd been tracking Graham's. She was no longer just an intern who had stumbled onto a conspiracy. She was a target, marked for elimination by people who had already demonstrated they were willing to go to any lengths to protect their secrets. But as she stared at the threatening photograph, Jasmine Brooks made a promise to herself. She might be 17 years old, she might be scared, but she wasn't going to let them win. She had evidence of a conspiracy that reached deep into the heart of Nexus AI. Tomorrow, she would help Graham set a trap that would expose the real mastermind behind the operation. Tonight, she would prepare for war. The executive boardroom of Nexus AI felt different after hours, its polished surfaces reflecting the glow of emergency lighting as Graham Leary sat alone at the head of the conference table. It was nearly midnight, and the building hummed with the quiet energy of servers and security systems. He'd been waiting for Jasmine for 20 minutes, going over her encrypted message again and again, trying to process the scope of what she'd uncovered. The door opened quietly, and Jasmine slipped inside, looking exhausted but determined. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and she carried her personal laptop like a shield against her chest. "Thank you for meeting me so late," Graham said softly. "After your message, I knew we couldn't wait until morning." Jasmine nodded, setting her laptop on the table and opening it carefully. "It's bigger than we thought, Mr. Leary. Curtis isn't the mastermind, he's just a tool. Someone else is pulling the strings. Show me everything." For the next hour, Jasmine walked him through her discoveries: the shell company, the hidden server directory, the sophisticated network of surveillance and data theft that had been operating under their noses for months. Graham's expression grew darker with each revelation. "Industrial espionage," he said finally. "They're not just watching me, they're stealing our intellectual property. The question is who's behind Titan Ventures. The paper trail goes cold at the law firm, but there has to be a connection to someone inside the company. Someone with enough access and authority to coordinate all this." Graham leaned back in his chair, his mind racing through possibilities. "We need to force them into the open. Set a trap that's too tempting to resist." "What did you have in mind?" "Bait," Graham said simply. "Something valuable enough to make them take risks." The plan they devised was elegant in its simplicity. Graham would announce the transfer of Nexus AI's most sensitive project, the Neural Assistance Core algorithms, to a secure off-site facility. The files would be coded with digital markers that Jasmine could track, invisible breadcrumbs that would lead them straight to whoever accessed the stolen data. "I'll need you to create false files," Graham explained. "Something that looks legitimate but contains tracking code you can monitor." Jasmine's fingers flew across her keyboard as she began crafting the digital trap. "I can embed unique identifiers in each file, timestamp markers that will ping back to my secure server whenever they're accessed. Whoever takes the bait won't even know they're being tracked." They worked until dawn, creating a collection of files that looked like the company's most valuable secrets, but were actually sophisticated monitoring tools. Graham scheduled the fake transfer for the following afternoon, sending out a company-wide memo about the routine security protocol. The trap was set by noon. At 2:47 p.m., Jasmine's monitoring system lit up like a Christmas tree. Someone had accessed the files from Curtis's workstation, just as they'd expected. But what happened next made Jasmine's blood run cold. "Mr. Leary," she whispered, staring at her screen in horror. "The files weren't just accessed, they were immediately shared." "With who?" "That's the problem. The recipient isn't some external contact. It's another workstation inside the building." Graham leaned over her shoulder, watching as the tracking data populated on her screen. The secondary access was coming from the executive floor, from a workstation registered to Layla Harrow, the head of research and development. Layla? Graham's voice was barely audible. That's impossible. But the evidence was undeniable. Layla Harrow, one of his most trusted executives and a major shareholder in the company, was the real mastermind behind the conspiracy. The timestamps showed a pattern of file access that went back months, always coordinated with Curtis's surveillance reports on Graham's activities. She's been planning this for a long time, Jasmine said, pulling up more data. Look at these communication logs. She's been in contact with Titan Ventures since before the shell company was even officially registered. Graham sank into his chair, the betrayal hitting him like a physical blow. Layla had been with the company since its early days, had helped build the research division from the ground up. She owned nearly 15% of Nexus AI's stock, making her one of the wealthiest people in Silicon Valley. Why would she do this? He asked, more to himself than to Jasmine. The answer came as Jasmine dug deeper into the digital trail. Hidden in the metadata of the stolen files were references to a business plan, a detailed strategy for launching a competing AI company using Nexus's stolen intellectual property. She's not just stealing from you, Jasmine realized. She's planning to destroy you. Launch a competitor with your own technology, probably hiring away your best engineers and researchers in the process. Graham's hands clenched into fists. Curtis was feeding her information about my schedule, my meetings, my strategic plans. She knew every move I was going to make before I made it. And she's been using that intelligence to stay one step ahead, to position herself and her co-conspirators for the perfect moment to strike. The scope of the betrayal was staggering. Layla hadn't just stolen technology, she'd stolen years of strategic planning, research data, and competitive intelligence. She'd been systematically undermining Nexus AI from within, preparing to launch her own venture with stolen resources and insider knowledge. There's something else, Jasmine said quietly, her voice heavy with concern. The timeline suggests she's been planning to make her move soon. Maybe even this week. Graham looked up sharply. What makes you say that? The activity patterns have been accelerating. More file transfers, more coordination between Curtis and Layla's workstation. They're not just gathering intelligence anymore, they're preparing for extraction. The realization hit Graham like a lightning bolt. The board meeting scheduled for the next day, where he was supposed to present the quarterly results and announce the company's strategic direction for the coming year. Layla would be there, along with the other major shareholders and executives. She's going to make her play at the board meeting, he said. Present some kind of vote of no confidence, probably using inside information to justify it. Jasmine nodded grimly. And with Curtis feeding her intelligence about your plans, she'll know exactly how to counter every argument you make. Graham stood up, pacing to the window that overlooked the parking garage where this all began. Not if we expose her first. Mr. Leary, we have enough evidence to bury both of them. The tracking data, the stolen files, the shell company connections, it's all documented. Graham turned back to face her, and Jasmine saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Not just anger or betrayal, but cold, calculated determination. Tomorrow's board meeting is going to be very interesting, he said quietly. What are you going to do? Graham smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I'm going to give Layla Harrow exactly what she deserves. As they prepared to leave the boardroom, either of them noticed the small device hidden behind the conference table's built-in speaker system, or the fact that every word of their conversation had been transmitted to a monitoring station 3 floors below. The trap had been set, but they weren't the only ones laying bait. The Nexus AI boardroom was packed to capacity the following afternoon, tension crackling through the air like electricity before a storm. 12 board members sat around the polished table, their faces ranging from curious to concerned as they waited for Graham Leary to begin what many assumed would be a routine quarterly presentation. Layla Harrow sat 3 seats to Graham's right, her expression calm and professional, a leather portfolio open in front of her. She looked every inch the successful tech executive, sharp blazer, confident posture, the slight smile of someone who knew something others didn't. Jasmine, watching from a chair along the wall designated for junior staff, felt her stomach clench with nerves. "Before we begin the quarterly review," Graham announced, his voice carrying easily through the room, "I need to address a serious matter that has come to my attention." Several board members exchanged glances. Layla's expression didn't change, but Jasmine noticed her fingers tighten almost imperceptibly around her pen. 2 days ago, one of our interns discovered evidence of systematic corporate espionage targeting this company and its leadership. Graham's words fell into the room like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock and murmured concern. Board member Patricia Chen leaned forward. "What kind of espionage?" "Surveillance devices, stolen intellectual property, and the creation of a shell company designed to launch a competing venture using our proprietary technology." Graham gestured to Jasmine, who stood nervously and approached the presentation screen. "Ms. Brooks, would you please share your findings with the board?" Jasmine's hands trembled slightly as she connected her laptop to the projection system. She'd rehearsed this moment in her head dozens of times, but facing a room full of powerful executives still made her feel like she was 17 again, which, she reminded herself, she was. "It started with a Bluetooth signal," she began, her voice growing stronger as she fell into the familiar rhythm of technical explanation. "A tracking device hidden in Mr. Leary's car, transmitting his location data every 30 seconds. The presentation unfolded like a detective story, each piece of evidence building on the last. The MAC address registered to Curtis Hale. The hidden server directory. The shell company in the Cayman Islands. The sophisticated network of surveillance and data theft. The trail led us to Titan Ventures LLC," Jasmine continued, displaying the corporate registration documents. "A company with no public presence, registered 6 months ago for the apparent purpose of developing competing AI technology." Around the table, board members were taking notes, asking sharp questions, their expressions growing more serious with each revelation. But Jasmine kept her eyes on Layla, watching for any crack in the woman's composed facade. "Yesterday, we set a digital trap," Jasmine explained, pulling up the tracking data. "False files containing sensitive AI algorithms, embedded with monitoring code that would ping back whenever accessed." The room fell silent as the tracking logs populated on screen, showing the precise timestamps and workstation identifiers of everyone who had accessed the bait files. "The files were first accessed by Curtis Hale at 2:47 p.m., Jasmine said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "They were then immediately forwarded to a second workstation." She clicked to the next slide, and Layla Harrow's employee ID filled the screen. The silence that followed was deafening. All eyes turned to Layla, who sat frozen in her chair, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking. "This is ridiculous," Layla said, her voice sharp with indignation. "Some teenager's conspiracy theory doesn't constitute evidence of anything." But Graham was already standing, nodding to someone near the door. 2 security officers entered, followed by Curtis Hale in handcuffs, his face pale and defeated. "Curtis has been very cooperative with our security team," Graham said quietly. "He's provided detailed information about the operation, including recorded conversations with his handler." Curtis looked directly at Layla, his voice hollow as he spoke. "I'm sorry, Layla. They said you take care of my legal fees, but I can't go down alone for this." Layla's face went white. "Curtis, what are you doing? Tell them about the business plan," Curtis continued, his words tumbling out in a rush. "Tell them about the investor meetings you've been taking. Tell them about the team you've been recruiting." The walls of Layla's deception crumbled in real time. Board members began pulling out their phones, some calling lawyers, others security. The carefully orchestrated coup she'd been planning for months was collapsing around her. "The evidence is overwhelming," Graham said, his voice carrying a mixture of sadness and cold satisfaction. "Systematic theft of intellectual property, breach of fiduciary duty, and conspiracy to defraud the company and its shareholders." Security officers moved toward Layla, who finally stood, her professional mask completely discarded. "You have no idea what you're doing," she snarled at Graham. "This company is stagnating under your leadership. I was offering it a future. By stealing it? Graham's voice was ice cold. By betraying every principle we built this company on. As Layla was escorted from the room, her stock options frozen pending legal review, Graham turned his attention back to the stunned board members. The immediate crisis has been contained, he announced. Security is conducting a full audit of our systems, and we're working with federal authorities to ensure full prosecution. But his expression softened as he looked toward Jasmine, who was still standing by the presentation screen, looking overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just unfolded. Ms. Brooks, Graham said, his voice warm with genuine gratitude. Could I see you in my office after this meeting? 20 minutes later, Jasmine sat across from Graham in his private office, the city skyline stretching out behind him through floor-to-ceiling windows. You didn't just catch a mole, Graham said, echoing the words she'd imagined him saying. You saved the company. I just did what anyone would do, Jasmine replied, though her voice betrayed how surreal this all felt. Graham smiled. No, you did what someone with exceptional skills and integrity would do. Which is why I'm offering you something. He slid a folder across the desk. Full scholarship through MIT or Stanford, whichever you prefer. Plus a guaranteed position here when you graduate, with a salary that starts at more than most people make after 10 years in the industry. Jasmine stared at the papers, hardly believing what she was reading. Mr. Leary, you earned this. All of it. As she walked out of the building an hour later, scholarship paperwork in her bag and a future brighter than she'd ever imagined stretching out before her, Jasmine saw Curtis being led to a police car in handcuffs. He looked up and met her eyes through the glass doors, his expression a mixture of regret and something that might have been respect. But it was Graham she thought about as she headed back to her dorm to pack. He'd trusted her when she was just a scared teenager with an impossible story. He'd listened when she whispered those words that changed everything. There's a tracker in your car. Back in her room, Jasmine plugged in her laptop and immediately began work on her first official project as a Nexus AI employee, designing a security system that would ensure no one ever infiltrated the company like this again. Some walls, once built, were meant to stand forever.